Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new, my name is Monica. I'm a tarot reader and astrologer based in far north Queensland in Australia. And today I'm looking at 10 fairly important considerations when creating a tarot deck. So I was thinking about this while I was away on holiday. I bought 2 or 3 decks, I think 3 decks with me. I don't take a lot of tarot decks with me when I go traveling. I find that 2 or 3 is more than enough. And it got me thinking as to why do I find those decks so enduring? You know, the decks that I had for such a long time, including like the Morgan Greer Tarot. And, you know, what were the important things that made them really fantastic decks to work with, and what some of the newer decks on the market are sort of missing the mark on. And this is entirely in my opinion. I've been a tarot reader now since 2008. I got into tarot around 2007, late 2007, and then I think it was about a year later I did my first tarot reading, and since then I've done readings, I've worked at festivals, I've got a very small but niche client base that I read for online, and I've seen dozens, hundreds, I've probably gone through about 200 different tarot decks in that time. I've got a core of just over 100 tarot decks as part of my collection that I've kept, and all the others I've donated or sold online. And essentially what I'm looking at is, you know, why so many decks really didn't make the cut or the mark for me as a practicing reader. I think it's different, obviously, if you're a collector, you're going to collect a wide variety of decks with all sorts of different themes and things like that, and that's fine. I'm not saying there's an issue with that per se, but as a practicing reader, you know, what makes a deck like a really good reading deck? And I listed 10 things. I've got them on a piece of paper here because there's too many to remember. My poor brain just can't cope with lack of sleep and kids and everything else. So I did do a list for this, and I want to go through that. And obviously this is my personal opinion. It's not, you know, like, you know, I am the truth and the only truth, and there will be other readers or deck creators that might comment in the comments below. I'm leaving that open for comments that might add to this, or, you know, reply to say that's not the case for them. That's perfectly fine. These are just my top 10 things. You know, if you're thinking about creating your tarot deck, I think these are things that you really need to pay attention to in creating your deck. So with that in mind, let's start with number 1. And number 1 is, which tradition or which system are you going to use? So with tarot, there's pretty much like 3 main traditions. There's the Marseille, which is like, if you like, the founding block of all tarot decks, right? That's the deck that we have the earliest historical factual data as being in existence, from the 15th century. And there are modern decks that are created that use the Marseille system, and they're fantastic. It is one of the lesser used systems. The next 2 are the Thoth, which was created by Aleister Crowley. It was painted by Lady Frida Harris. And then we have the Rider-Waite-Smith, which in my opinion is the most popular system that most of the modern decks are based on, and that's the Rider-Waite-Smith system, created by, well, the art was done by Pamela Coleman Smith under the instruction of Edward White. So those are the main 3 ones, and I think that, you know, it's good to have a think about them because they all have their pluses and minuses, of course. And the Rider-Waite-Smith being the most popular doesn't mean that there aren't some fantastic decks that have come out in the Thoth tradition or in the Marseille tradition that are really a pleasure to read with. So those are the main 3. So have a think about that. The second consideration is the number of cards you're going to create. And you might think that shouldn't be an issue. The tarot is a system of 78 cards. A tarot deck has 78 cards, no more, no less. But what we have in the wider tarot world is a lot of decks that add to that number unnecessarily, in my opinion. And sometimes there are decks, rarely, on a rare occasion, you will see a deck being labeled as a tarot deck, which actually is not a tarot deck. It doesn't have the tarot structure. So one example of that is, let me just find it, because I bought this, it came earlier this year, and this was the Star Lore Astronomical Tarot. Don't know how well this will zoom for you. There we go. So the Star Lore Astronomical Tarot. Now, this deck is a really wonderfully executed deck, except that it's a huge letdown in terms of the fact that it's not following the tarot structure and the symbolism and the association. It was basically a deck where the artist or the creator took a system of images, historical images, and essentially associated them with tarot cards, but it's really not a tarot deck, okay? Now, the other opposite end of the scale is where creators add to the decks. They'll add an extra Fool card, they'll add an extra Lovers card. I don't think that's a huge issue per se, but I think it's unnecessary. I'm very rarely, would use the extra cards. I read strictly with 78 cards in the tradition of tarot. The other one is, was working recently with the Pagan Otherworlds, and they added in this deck, extra like moon cards. So you've got like, that one, that's a seeker card. So that's an extra card that people can choose to put in. I don't. And then they've got like cards for the different moon phases. They're great to photograph and for visual appeal. Sometimes when I do a moon phases spread, I might put them out. But look, all I'm saying is that's not necessary, and don't feel like you have to add extra cards for your deck creation. Okay, number 3, and this is by far one that I think lets down deck creators, is know your system. And what I mean by that is learn your system, learn it inside out, spend time with each of the cards. If you're creating a Thoth deck, understand what each of the card, its meaning, the symbolism behind it. You have to really know it really, really well. Even practice with it. You might just want to create a tarot deck and have no interest in applying it for tarot readings. But I say, the magic of tarot and the beauty of it is when it actually is applied in real life for pragmatic questions, for reading for other people. Don't be scared to do so, because it will really show you the meaning of cards, and it will really enhance your understanding of those cards and what they mean. I think there's nothing like reading for someone else, as daunting as that may be. It will certainly add to your knowledge of a tarot deck, so that when you create a deck, it stands the test of time. There are many decks that have been created where you can tell that the artist hasn't really done their homework. They've, like, say 70% of the cards are fine, but then there's some cards that you sort of wonder, well, where they get that from? That's not really keeping in with the structure. And hey, I get it that, okay, art is a creative medium and artists absolutely have the free license to create as they wish, but you're working here with a system that has a set structure. You're working within that structure. Otherwise, I honestly don't think that your deck will really stand the test of time. And yes, I know there are exceptions to that, and people say, oh, I've got this deck and it's not like the Rider-Waite system, but it's amazing. And I'm not disputing that, but I personally, I honor the tradition of tarot very much so. And I think that if you want to create a truly excellent deck, then knowing that system and understanding it and learning it and applying it, your art to that, I think is the best way to make sure that your deck will be well received in the tarot community. And I'll take this to the next point, which is point number 4, is research which other decks there are that align with your theme. So are there decks of a similar theme? For example, if you're going to do an animal-based deck, have a look at what other animal-based decks there are out there. And the reason you want to do that is because the tarot market now in the year 2024 is, in my opinion, fully saturated. There are so many tarot decks that people like me and a lot of other readers, I know that when there's, say I've already got 2 or 3 animal themed decks, so if another one comes along, I'm going to think really carefully about buying it. Is it completely new and different to what I have? Because if it's not, I'm not going to actually go ahead and purchase that. It will just be another animal-based deck that I will not be using, or let's say another flower-based deck or another mythology-based deck, right? There are decks based on mythology, like Greek mythology. I've got a Byzantine tarot. There's a Etruscan tarot. There's all sorts of historically based decks as well. So, I'm going to look at my library of decks and go, well, I've already got that, and a new edition doesn't have anything amazing to add. It's not radically different, or it's not, the artwork isn't it's not separating itself to those that are already existing out there. So I think that's why point number 4 is doing your research on what other decks there are so that you understand your market. Because the truth is that now in 2024, if you're creating a tarot deck, it's very different to the 90s and the early 2000s, when I do feel like there was so much more of a market out there. Number 1, because there weren't as many tarot decks out there, but number 2, the economic situation was completely different than it is now. And to create a deck takes a lot of effort, and like, I'm not saying if you have an idea and an impulse to create a tarot deck, like that is a really deep desire of yours, I'm not saying don't do it because there's already a deck of that theme out there. Obviously, if that's a really deep yearning for you and something that you really want to express creatively, by all means go and do it. But try and understand that there's already so many different other decks out there that it might impact on how well you're able to publish your deck and sell it. Okay, because at the end of the day, if you're creating a tarot deck that you want to get out there, you're gonna want to sell it. Otherwise, you're creating it for your own private use, but this video is not for you. This video is for someone who really wants to create a tarot deck and put it out there to the wider tarot world. Okay, so that's number 4, is research, existing decks that are on the market that are similar to your idea. Number 5, and this is a huge pet peeve of mine, is, are you the artist? Yes, there are many decks where the name on the cover isn't actually the artist. And of course, this is coming from, the historical facts. You look at the Thoth Tarot. The Thoth Tarot was actually painted by Lady Frida Harris. However, the Thoth Tarot, you'll often see that it's being created by Aleister Crowley. Even more important, the Rider-Waite-Smith, which is the most important tarot deck, in my opinion, in the modern times, and upon which so many other tarot decks are based on, was created by Pamela Colman Smith under instruction of Edward White. But for decades, her name wasn't mentioned on the Rider-Waite decks. It was very common to just refer to it as a Waite deck or a Rider-Waite deck, the Rider deck, not Smith. And even I catch myself sometimes missing out her surname, because that's actually only in the last decade or so, when research was really done on her life. When it was found out that Pamela, she drew all the images of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, but she was never accorded the royalties that really should have been accorded to her. And from my understanding is that she died essentially penniless and buried in an unmarked grave. So if you're creating a deck and you're not the artist, it is really, really important, in my opinion, that you acknowledge the artist throughout the whole process. Now, some decks like Oak, Ash and Thorn have done that really well. They have really mentioned, who is the artist behind those images. But I also feel like even things like on the cover, are you giving the artist the same weight as what you're giving yourself if you're, like, say, just a book writer? Because, like it or not, the potency of tarot is in the images themselves, is in those paintings of the deck. So one of my favorite decks is, the Green Witch Tarot, which I have right behind me. And you'll see that in big letters it's written by Anne Mora, or it's created by Anne Mora. But then on the smaller font it says art by Kiri Ostengard Leonard. Now, okay, Kiri is mentioned on the front, but she's not, in my opinion, as soon as you put it on a smaller font beneath the main creator, I just don't think you're giving that artist the recognition that they deserve, because essentially the magic of this deck is in the images themselves. Now, I'm not here to disparage the Green Witch. It's a fantastic deck and I use it regularly and I think it's really well done. It does have a fantastic book associated with it. But I just really hope that, the artist, the person that is actually creating the artwork and the cards, is given at least the very same weight in recognition as the writer or as the person who came up with the idea of the deck. So that's a really big thing for me, and especially with some of the modern mass market decks that you actually don't know who created the images. Another example here would be the Black Moon astrology cards. I've got them. I'm not gonna get them because I don't think it's it's an oracle deck. It's not a tarot deck, but when I read through, the little booklet, it turned out that the creator that they've got the name on, the cover is not actually who created the images, and there is no mention of that person. Obviously, the digital collage, and they could just get someone, they might have just outsourced that overseas. Someone in the Philippines might have done the artwork for that and just send it through. But I think that's just not right, given the history of what we know about Pamela Coleman Smith and how she was treated, and the fact that she wasn't recognized for her contribution. I think it's atrocious that the actual artists aren't given the weight and recognition that they deserve, in my opinion, at least. So enough about that. I know that I've kind of rambled on about that, but I had to. Number 6, are you going to go with a mainstream or an indie publisher? So I can't tell you the ins and outs of each and what the advantages and the disadvantages of each are. Obviously, as an indie publisher, you can use a platform like Kickstarter to essentially bypass a mainstream publisher, and I understand that you get more royalties that way. Of course, you might not get the publicity that a mainstream publisher might be able to offer a deck creator. I'm thinking about US Games or Llewellyn, and there's a few others out there. And this is important for a number of things. So if you're going with an indie publisher in particular, like if you're going to go with either a small publisher or you're going to go through Kickstarter, have a think about the number of decks that you're going to print. And this is important because if you only print, let's say, 600 decks, 1,000 decks, let's say, and your deck becomes popular and really well received, which everybody wants, there's the opportunity for others to counterfeit your deck. Okay, this is a really huge issue in the tarot world, and it has led to prominent deck creators like Baba Studio and Patrick Valenza, who created the Deviant Moon deck, to basically say, we don't see why we should keep on creating decks. We put all this effort, and they create, such excellent quality decks, and they put so much time. Like for Baba Studio, if they do a deck from scratch, it'll take them years. Like their cats, Bohemian Cats, they get like someone who's trained in creating costumes from the Baroque period to make their costumes for their cats and create the stages, and that's before you even get to the digital enhancing and making sure the images are right. So they've basically come and said, our decks are being counterfeit. There are fake decks circulating on the tarot market all the time for pennies, and it devalues and disincentivizes deck creators in essentially creating more decks. And there's ways you can get around that. You can create numbered decks, but then have a think about how you're going to actually make sure when it comes to shipping that those decks are going to be numbered, because if you're going to get them published overseas, somebody's going to have to mark on those decks, include like a marking card. So an example of that is, the Maria Tarot. Okay, so I recently got this fantastic deck. I don't have any issues with it. However, the numbered card that comes with it isn't actually numbered, and mine, it turns out that that's how they all are. So at the very back here, I can't get it out, it's stuck to the back, but don't know if you can see that. Anyway, I'm not sure if you can see that, but basically there is a numbered card and it's meant to have the actual number of the deck, and that didn't happen. Now, for me, that's not a huge deal. I know this is an authentic deck, but if you're going to do a limited print run, have a think about how you're going to make sure that when those decks are out in the world, they retain their value as genuine decks, particularly when people come to sell them in second-hand markets. I would not buy a deck unless I know the person selling it, or they have some sort of genuine way of identifying the deck, and a marked card is one of those ways. But basically, yeah, if you're going with an indie publisher or doing it yourself, be aware of the issues around copyright and false decks. That's a scourge on the tarot world in the last few years. It's become really, really atrocious. Okay, number 7, the shipping costs. Now, obviously, if you're going with a mainstream publisher, that is not an issue per se. But if you are particularly going with an indie publisher or doing like a Kickstarter, shipping costs have become a really big issue. I know in my instance, I have had some decks where I was billed for extra shipping and considerable amount of extra shipping long after the campaign closed, and I had already paid for a set amount of shipping. So you want to really research this, particularly if your deck is nowhere near finished. And so if you're doing a Kickstarter campaign and you've got another 20 cards to get through and it's going to take you 6 months, how are you going to make sure that you'll be able to maintain those costs for shipping? Because these days that's a real wild card. Number 8, alongside shipping costs, is the timing to ship. So I've already touched on that a little bit, but if your deck is not complete, you need to be transparent about that and let your backers know that what the expected timelines are. 6 months to wait for a deck is stretching it a bit. I have waited for that in the past because I've really liked the decks, but now I'm not so inclined to do so. The 9th consideration that you really want to think about is cardstock. Now, this for me is one of those things that makes or breaks a deck. It doesn't matter how good the artwork is. If the cardstock is atrocious, it means that I don't like shuffling it, which means that I will not be using it, which means it will languish in the back of my cabinet for years, and then finally I will get rid of it. It's not going to stick around. I have had instances of that in the past. Now, okay, I hear you say, but cardstock is a personal preference, and to some extent that is true. But in other ways, it's not. And there are a number of things that come within that umbrella of cardstock, and I'm going to talk about each of those on their own. So the first one is the ethics of printing and how that cardstock comes about. And I honestly think that this is like the elephant in the room of the tarot world, because there are hundreds of decks that get churned out every year. And, unless you're completely disconnected from reality, the fact is that we live on a finite planet with finite resources. And yes, there are ways that some of those resources are renewable. We're talking about bamboo for paper and things like that. There are other resources that are not so renewable, like hardwood forests. So you need to really have a think about that. These days, and for a long time, I have given preference to those deck creators that are very transparent as to, their printing ethos. So Oak, Ash, and Thorn being one of them, the Gaia and Tarot being another, and there's a few others, but not many. And that really bugs me, that in particular, mainstream publishing companies just churn out these decks with no consideration for the environment. And I don't care what they say about printing, offset credits. I'm sorry, offset credits, I can go on and on about that, but it's just like another greenwash tactic to ensure that they can just print irrelevant decks ad nauseum. Is that the word? Ad nauseum? Because it is nauseating. I don't think that's the right word. But anyway, you get what I'm saying. It is possible to print decks of cardstock that comes from ethical sources, and there are printing companies that do so. So that is, I think, a really important consideration. The second one is, are you going to do things like gilding? Are your cards going to have gilding on them? Personally, I I feel like gilding is a bit of a fad. Like, yeah, it makes cards look nice and shiny, but it's not really necessary. It's not going to add to my readings at all. Some of them look nice, some of them look really bad. And also, talking about gilding, you need to make sure that the gilding will stick to the edges from the printing process, because there are many decks where that's not the case and the gilding just starts to flake off. The next one with cardstock is, you're going to go for matte or like a shiny laminate plastic cover. For me, the latter is like a big no-no. I have sold decks that I consider to be great from an artistic point of view, or from, you know, the theme that they have, like the Modern Witch, but the cardstock was just awful. It was so plasticky. I don't care if that means that if I spill my cup of tea on it, I'll lose the deck. I'm prepared to take that hit. I'm not gonna buy plastic decks just in case, on the odd occasion that I will spill my tea on it. And yes, I have done that, but that's another story. So, you know, what type of finish are you going to go for? And that also affects how easily the cards will fan, you know, the ease of fanning of the cards. And I'll put up a video so you can see me demonstrating this. I'm going to use a recent deck that I have, which is the, what is it called? Urban Incantations, which I've got here. So I'm going to fan this, and you'll see, because of the way that this cardstock is, the cards just glide over each other so nicely. Like it's a fantastic way to fan the cards. Whereas other cardstocks, like this one from Cosmic Cycles, this is atrocious for fanning, and I love this deck. I absolutely think it's a top deck for me, the Cosmic Cycles, but I can't fan it. Now, that's not like a huge deal, fanning itself, but it's just something else. You know, have a think about all the different types of cardstock and the thicknesses. I don't think that thick is necessarily better. In fact, I'm a huge fan of the older mainstream, like Los Scarabeo and even US Games published decks. They have a thinner cardstock, but you know what? It does stand the test of time, and it's just really nice and light to shuffle. It's not too heavy, it's not too clumsy. They're just like really, really easy to work with. So I think everything else beyond that is just a gimmick, you know, like gilding or really fancy thick cardstock or anything like that. Something else under cardstock is also, will your cards bend when stored? So some materials and some cardstock, you will find that when they get stored, you get a bit of a, you can probably even see it here, you get like this very, very slight, let me have a look. A very slight bending or curvature in the cards, and that's really annoying. It's not like the end all or be all, but it's just like a little bit, like it's hard to get out once you have it. You gotta put your cards under, you know, books and make sure that, you know, or, you know, shuffle them the other way. And then anyway, basically what I'm trying to say with this point number 9 on cardstock is that there's actually quite a lot of considerations that you have to think about when you're considering cardstock. Even like things like borders. Are you going to add borders to your images and things like that? Is your card going to be round, square, or rectangle? Personally, I still think that the rectangle size are just like the best size, the standard US Games card size for me. I don't mind round decks. I've got the square one, like the Dark Days. It doesn't really work that well. I still think, you know, sometimes people try and be innovative just for the sake of being innovative, and I kind of wish that they just stuck with what works. But anyway, that could be a personal thing, so some people will argue that point, of course. Number 10 is the presentation of your deck. Are you going to put it in a box, like a solid box? Are you going to do like a thin box like this, which are much more susceptible to breaking? Are you going to do, like, for example, the Maria Tarot is a really excellent box. It's like really sturdy, really thick, and it's got an easy magnetic, you know, hinge type closure, whatever you call it. Are you going to put it in a bag, or like a Hessian bag or a cloth bag? Are you going to do any additional goodies, which is quite popular for Kickstarter campaigns? I don't care for goodies. Honestly, if I'm buying a deck, I'm buying a tarot deck. I don't want pins. I don't want cloths. I don't want anything else. I don't want stickers. I hate stickers. What am I going to do with stickers? Like, the world is awash in stickers. I've got 2 young kids. If I see another sticker, I'll honestly like start screaming. Like I get that it's appealing for some people and they feel like they get more for their buck. But ultimately, what I want is a really well considered tarot deck. Not lots of little gimmicks and things like that. Like, sure, a nice cloth is lovely and things like that, but really they're unnecessary. I would say put your effort into creating a really good deck, and you won't have the need to do pins and stickers and all sorts of like postcards and whatever else comes with it. That's really not necessary, in my opinion. I don't know. I might be out of touch with reality, potentially, being a hermit and all. So that's number 10, but I do actually have number 11 because I'm a bit sleep deprived today and I can't count clearly. So number 11, I think, is the biggest elephant in the room for the tarot world, and I think for society at large, and that is AI, artificial intelligence. Okay. My comments on this are, if a deck creator doesn't disclose whether the deck has AI or not, I personally will not buy it. I mean, I will not buy AI decks anyhow. I do think you can tell the difference. I think there's something just so, it's like polyestery about it, if that's the right word to use. You think about a dress made out of cotton and a dress made out of nylon or polyester, like it's like that. Okay, I know it's not quite like that, but for me it really is like that. And I'm sure unless you're living under a rock, and if you're part of the tarot world, you would have seen the recent issue with the Victorian Romantic Tarot, where someone took the cards that were created by Baba Studio and fed them through like an AI program, like, I don't know, whatever the name of the AI program is, but basically they fed through the images and that program spat out a tarot deck that had the same settings and structure as the original, but looked nothing like it. It's this really weird dystopian thing that it was awful. And of course, I think they lobbied against it with Kickstarter, and it got taken down because there's just plagiarism. That's downright plagiarism. But even when it's not plagiarism, it's really hard for a person to know with an AI created deck where those images came from, unless the artist is like super transparent and they're going to list the source for each of their images. Okay, so decks that use other images, that's not the issue, because they've been around in the tarot world for a long time. You think about the Golden Tarot by Cat Black, which is one of my top tarot decks out there. Now, Cat Black used images from paintings, and the same with Baba Studio, and the same with many others who've used paintings from the Renaissance or medieval times or whatever, even modern times. But they give credit and they list where those images come from. Like, I know with Cat Black, the Golden Tarot, she lists where those images came from, like where she did her research and sourced those images, and that's fantastic. Like, that's not the issue itself. The issue is that you get into this sort of nebulous sphere where there is no such recognition, and you really have no idea where that's come from. And there are very few tarot deck collectors that support AI without questioning it. Personally, I don't touch them. If I see a deck on Kickstarter that I think has a bit of an AI tinge to it, I either connect with the creator and ask them to disclose that if they have, or actually make it clear. I think if you're going to create a deck and if you use AI, you should clarify that. And if you don't use AI, even more importantly, please say so, that you have not used AI to create a deck. I place decks that are hand painted in huge, like, high regard, and decks that have thought and consideration towards using other sources. I place those in high regard. And I think AI is just this nebulous beast that's sort of proliferating like a bad miasma through our society. And it's out there and we can't quite get rid of it. It's already infiltrated so many different levels. of, you know, work and jobs and things like that. And you know, this is a bigger conversation because I know people go, oh, you know, it's progress and so on and so forth. And it was the same with the Industrial Revolution. And yeah, it was the same, except that if you ask me now, if I have a choice between buying a commercial, mainstream, mass market, let's say, type of clothing with, you know, polyester, plastic fibers, or if I have the choice of buying something from someone that's handmade by someone where the fibers is like hemp or cotton or bamboo or something that was, you know, it's got an ethical history behind it, I know which one I'm going to go for. I have such a high regard for handcrafted goods, and this isn't about, you know, me blowing my trumpet about how great I am. I think that it's, you know, that's not the point. I do love the sound of my own voice now and then, but I think that there is a huge movement towards that handcrafted, tangible goods, and people just really crave that. There's not enough of that out there. Like, it's like a breath of fresh air when you come across them, versus mainstream, you know, billions and billions of items that are all like cookie cutter nonsense. And I feel like AI is just, it is another sort of step on our progress, I suppose you could say that. But like the Industrial Revolution, but that doesn't mean that either of these revolutions have removed our need for the human touch. Okay, that's really what I'm going with this, if I'm making sense. But anyway, that's number 11, and it's kind of like in its own category. And look, like I said, this is my personal, I guess, experience. These are personal opinions based on my own personal experience. And I think that there are people that will disagree with it, or there are people that will agree with it. And there might be lots of other things that I have missed out on. And if there's anything that you think that is important for a deck creator to consider, please add it in the comments below. Because, you know, people aren't going to stop creating tarot decks. But if you can get some suggestions and some help to support you in your deck creation from people that have worked with tarot for years and years and years, then I hope that they are of use to you and of help to you. And I personally still look forward to seeing new tarot decks come out that are of quality, and I look forward to backing those decks and obtaining them. But this year I have taken a break. I did a video earlier on in the year where I talked about how I'm sort of stopping sourcing decks from Kickstarter and things like that. I think this year I only purchased like 4 or 5 decks secondhand, and that was it for me. I just want to take a break because I think I started to feel a bit overwhelmed by just how much there was churning out of the Kickstarter engine, and on top of all the other mainstream publishing houses like US Games and Llewellyn. And I think, you know, for deck creators and for publishing houses, if they take some of these comments on board, like the tarot world is saturated, like I've mentioned, with so many tarot decks. If you're going to have the option between creating 10 decks that are mediocre in quality and content versus creating one that is exceptional in content and in you know, the artwork and, you know, the ethos that it was created with, go for that one. Like choosing to publish mediocre decks only devalues your reputation in the long run. I honestly do firmly believe that, and I hope to see more carefully curated tarot deck creations in the future. I certainly look forward to all the goodness in the art world that creates tarot decks and publishes them, and I know it will never end. I hope it never ends, but I certainly hope that what does come out is of exceptional quality and adds value to the tarot world. It's time for me to wrap this up. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's been useful for anyone who wants to create a tarot deck. And if you've got any questions or comments, you're more than welcome to either email me on my personal email, which I have in the description box below, or just leave a comment in the comment section below. But until my next video, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for supporting my channel. And until my next video, take care.